Everybody loves a good plot twist, and the best ones tend to sneak up on audiences totally out of nowhere, subverting expectations and making the movie fascinating on repeat viewings. But not all twists are made for epic, grand-standing moments, and sometimes writers like to keep their clever reveals a little more low-key, and perhaps only years or even decades later have they finally been unearthed, revealing new information about their respective film. Because each reveal and rug pull nevertheless lends crucial context, be it grim, hilarious, or simply eyebrow-raising, to their respective film, ensuring you'll never think about them quite the same way again. And just like the MCU, we are no stranger to sequels here, so I'm Will for What Culture, and here are 8 more movie plot twists so subtle you totally missed them. Number 8. Charlie was always possessed by Peyman, Hereditary. Both fantastically acted and technically amazing, Hereditary is a horror film in a class of its own. Aster's film is such an assault on the senses and the psyche that it's virtually impossible to take everything in on a first watch. And with that in mind, repeat watches make it far easier to deduce the twist hiding in front of the viewer the whole time, that poor young Charlie was actually possessed by King Peyman from birth. Firstly, there's numerous references to Annie's mother Ellen's bizarre fascination with Charlie, even breastfeeding her as a baby and presumably grooming her from birth to accept Peyman. And most convincing of all, Aster even confirmed it, quoting, "I mean, there's a girl that was displaced, but she was displaced from the very beginning." Basically, if you thought Charlie's incessant clicking and psychopathic method for eating chocolate were all signs there was something really wrong with her, then you were absolutely right. Rather than being a mere misfit though, the girl before you is nothing more than a blank slate. Number 7. Biff actually gave George the Dutch courage to hit him. Back to the Future 2. Back to the Future is just a perfect storm of first-rate writing, direction, acting, and special effects colliding together, allowing it to effortlessly endure over almost 35 years. And the first 2 Back to the Future movies feature one ironic reverse setup and payoff pertaining to George McFly eventually knocking the douchebag bully Biff out cold. In isolation, the film suggests that George simply mustered up the courage to take on Biff the old-fashioned way, but Back to the Future 2 quite blatantly implies that he had a little liquid encouragement. You see, the sequel shows Biff spiking the punch at the high school dance, and the first film showed George drinking that same punch before throwing a punch of his own. And after all, what is more beautifully ironic than Biff himself literally giving George the necessary courage to beat him down? Number 6. Chief is secretly a demigod, Wonder Woman. Just when everyone thought that the DCEU was out for the count, along came Patty Jenkins' Wonder Woman, a lighter than usual affair that nevertheless refused to downplay its well-drawn characters in favor of a CGI bombast, at least until the 3rd act. The extremely sly twist to this run refers not to Diana, Steve Trevor, or any major character in the movie, but Chief, one of the members of Diana's newly formed team. When he first introduces himself to her, they converse in the Native American Blackfoot language, where he refers to himself as Nappy. Now, to 99.9% of the audience, this would likely fly over their heads, but Nappy is actually the Native American god of creation. When asked on social media if this was simply a cutesy gag, Brave Rock confirmed that Chief is, in fact, a demigod. Though it doesn't change the overarching narrative in any major way, it certainly adds an interesting wrinkle to one of the movie's more mysterious supporting players, and potentially a little bit of sequel bait too. Number 5. Butch keyed Vincent's car, Pulp Fiction. What more needs to be said about Quentin Tarantino's masterful mystery drama? Between its innovative narrative structure, unforgettable dialogue, brilliant performances, and superb music, it is an indelible all-timer for many, many reasons, and still the best film of Quentin Tarantino's entire career. Fairly early on in Pulp Fiction, Vincent Vega pays a visit to his drug dealer Lance to pick up some new merch, and comments that someone keyed his car, memorably noting that it would have been worth it happening if he could catch the person doing it. A popular fan theory did the rounds for years that the perpetrator of the keying was actually none other than Butch Coolidge, after him and Vincent have a rather unpleasant stare down at a bar. Tarantino later confirmed this to be true, a fact that makes their fateful final run-in, with Vincent almost literally caught with his pants down on the business end of a machine gun toting Butch, all the more blackly hilarious. It's not a reveal that fundamentally reshapes the film, but it is nevertheless an important character beat which adds another layer of interconnectedness to Tarantino's already labyrinthine film. Number 4. Cole knew Malcolm was a ghost the whole time. The Sixth Sense. Destined to be remembered as M. Night Shyamalan's crowning achievement, The Sixth Sense is one of the most fondly remembered horror films of the last 2 decades. Nominated for 6 Oscars, including Best Picture, Best Director, and Best Original Screenplay, it is a tightly wound, often quietly suspenseful film that, of course, is best known for its jaw-dropping final plot twist, that protagonist Malcolm Crowe was actually dead the entire time. While this climactic twist is spelled out to the audience at the end of the movie with no ambiguity whatsoever, there's another twist hiding in plain sight, one which started out as a fan theory but was later confirmed by Shyamalan to be true. As it turns out, Cole Sear, a young boy with the ability to see dead people, knew that Malcolm was dead from the first moment he saw him. Firstly, Cole is terrified of Malcolm the first time he sees him, yet doesn't ask his mother who he is, because he knows she can't see him. Secondly, given that the film makes it clear that Cole sees dead people in whatever their final deathly state was, it's a pretty fair assumption that he's been spending the entire movie looking at Malcolm with a giant gaping gunshot wound emanating from his stomach. He even tells Malcolm that ghosts see what they want to see while peering at Malcolm's stomach, and Malcolm obviously sees himself as not wounded until he makes the climactic revelation. Number 3. Stanley is the Watcher informant. Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. Though the 2017 sequel to Guardians of the Galaxy perhaps didn't quite reach the same heights as its predecessor, it was nevertheless another dementedly funny, ultra-charming, and visually stunning thrill ride. Now, nobody missed Stan Lee's dual cameo in the movie, but not everybody quite knew the full extent of their meaning. Lee's first cameo occurs midway through the film as Rocket, Groot, Yondu, and Kraglin are traveling towards Ego's planet. As their ship flies overhead, we see Lee talking to the Watchers, explaining that he was once a Federal Express employee. While even fairly casual MCU viewers probably clocked that Lee's dialogue is a reference to his cameo as a FedEx delivery man in Captain America Civil War, it also confirmed a long-held fan theory that Lee's various MCU cameos are all experienced by the same entity. Though the theories largely suggested that Lee was the comic book character Uatu the Watcher, Lee is ultimately credited as the Watcher informant. Gunn later said that he conceived the scene as a direct reaction to the fan theory. Number 2. John Hammond caused the incident by sparing expense. Jurassic Park. Steven Spielberg's 1993 thriller Jurassic Park needs no introduction. It's another groundbreaking blockbuster from a filmmaker at the very top of their game. As for the most part, despite its fancy window dressing, Jurassic Park is a ruthlessly simple and efficient survival story with Spielberg's usual focus on unconventional family dynamics. In fact, the closest thing the film has to a twist is the revelation that the park's failure is caused by Dennis, and though the responsibility of the consequent carnage ultimately falls to him, the chain of causation actually goes back to industrialist John Hammond. Despite Hammond's claim that he spared no expense with the park, it's clearly implied that Nedry is overworked and underpaid, a fact that's even more obvious in the original book. The delicious irony is that if Hammond truly had spared no expense, then the disaster would never have happened. Number 1. Oscar is doomed to a terrible fate. Let the right one in. Thomas Alfredson's masterful Swedish horror classic, the film ends with Oscar almost being drowned in a swimming pool by bullies before Eli arrives and murders the majority of their number in a stunningly executed sequence. The final scene sees Oscar on board a train with a person-sized box accompanying him, within which Eli resides. Eli then taps the word kiss to Oscar in Morse code, to which he taps small kiss back, and we cut to black. Though a generous and optimistic reading of the film appears to suggest that a happy ending is in store for Oscar and Eli, if you've really been paying attention to the movie, that's not at all the fate awaiting Oscar. The overt implication is that Eli is effectively grooming Oscar to become her new handler, to seek out victims for her to feast on until he's an old man, just as Hakan did before his death. If you're willing to put your romantic tendencies aside, the truth becomes plainly clear. Eli is a baddie, and Oscar has a whole lot of murder, anguish, and confused feelings ahead of him for the rest of his life.